Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and honored guests. Tonight I need to start out with a story. And I need to give you some context. Now, I don't know how many people remember these, but around in the mid-90s, early 90s, these immense pieces of hardware were sitting on our desktops. And if you had a computer, someone knew what it looked like when they came over, because the thing that was most obvious was that thing. Now, when I got my first one of those, it wasn't quite the immense one that I have pictured here. It was a small 14-inch model, but it was still heavy. And over time, these got bigger and bigger, and eventually it got 15-inch, and 17-inch, and 19-inch, and they kind of topped out around 24 inches or so. But they're huge, and everybody knew what these things were. But technology changes, and as it gets newer and newer, it looks different. So these started to be phased out, but what replaced them were these nice, lovely, flat panels that went on our desks. They were great. They were much thinner. They were way lighter. They usually, after a few years, you could actually see better on them than you could on these old CRTs. It was great. And this was about 10 years ago. But a couple of other things started to happen at the same time. One of those is one of these things sitting here in front of me, laptops. Laptops finally got to where they were powerful enough, but yet compact enough to where they had enough battery life to be able to use. So laptops started out about that same 14-inch screen size, but they did something different. They took two directions. Instead of getting bigger like the desktop, only part of the laptops got bigger. You would get screens anywhere up to 17 inches. But at the same time, you had laptops that started getting smaller. And you would get laptops down to about 10 inches. But then something else that's kind of crazy happened. We got mobile phones that are computers. So we're now carrying around in our pockets, starting out around 3.5-inch screens and now up to 6-inch screens or so, of devices that are literally little computers in our pocket. And then the most recent one, we get iPads. We get Android tablets. And these things go anywhere from 6 inches to up to around 10 inches or so. So what was at one point this, well, it became these. Well, that kind of got weird, because now there's all these crazy options. And that sounds really good. But as always happens with technology, there are some times where you have a few unintended consequences. So let's step back in time 20 years ago and think about that big 14-inch monitor again that we had, that big, massive thing on our desk. Well, it was great for anybody designing a web page. Everybody had the same thing. You had this one piece of hardware that you had to target. So when you designed a website, you wrote one thing. Well, some time passes, and those screens get bigger. Well, now suddenly that screen that you designed that fit on that little screen, well, looks kind of odd because there's all this open space now. And the screens got bigger, and it looked even more odd. But then the laptops came in, and they started getting smaller. Well, now things just aren't fitting at all, because what did fit on a 14-inch doesn't fit on a 10-inch. And then we get a 3.5-inch device in our pockets. And then we get a 10-inch tablet. And these things you touch the screen, whereas before you're used to a keyboard and a mouse. So how we interact with the device got completely different than what we were used to. So what was at one point very simple, for web developers is now very complex. So how do you make all this work? Well, web developers first said, well, you know what? The desktop size, people can just deal with that big open white space on either side. Until mobile came along. And then they went, oh, well, what's on a 14-inch screen really won't fit on a 3.5-inch screen. You know what we'll do? We'll just make another website completely. We'll cut off all the images. It'll just be the text. And we'll just make it there, and it'll just scroll up and down. And that works. Until somebody started thinking, you know what? I really would like to see those images. And now web developers, great, I got to go do that too. So we got to put the images back on, but we got to make them small, because, and you got to click on them because you've got to be able to pull them up and see the detail. It's just complex. And then we threw in tablets, and now it's like, well, now it's all touch-based, and where the mouse and keyboard worked before, now it doesn't work, and I've got all these different capabilities of devices. And nothing works. And it's a nightmare to support these things. How do I know? I do it. So that's where about 3 years ago, somebody said, you know what? We really need to do something better. We need responsibly designed websites. This is a couple of screenshots from Starbucks' website. On the left over here, you'll see this phone. In the middle, you'll see the desktop. And on the right, you'll see the tablet. And it's all one website. Don't believe me? Well, I've got a little demo I would like to show you of how this actually works. So as you watch this, you'll notice the bars on the sides are shrinking. And in a moment, when I get small enough, you're going to see the screen change. Do you see it? Now watch, I'm going to back it up, and then I'm going to move it in a couple times. You see the images change, and the menu at the top changes. But I keep shrinking. I'm now going to tablet size. I'm going to move in and out from that a few times. I'm going to shrink some more, and I'm going to get to a large phone screen size. And you can see it moving up to this little button instead of the menu. And it's going to shrink and shrink a little more, and now I'm on a small phone size. It's all one website. Depends on the device you're accessing it from and how big your screen is to exactly how the experience works for you. So what's the problem that this is trying to solve? It's more devices, more browsers. They've all got different capabilities. Some of them have gyroscopes in them. Some of them have GPS, but your desktop doesn't have those things. Your desktop has a keyboard and a mouse, but these, you touch everything. The devices change, and they come out all the time. And you're supporting all this different content because they need different image sizes and different bits of text and different navigation structures. And what happens in the future, and this is the one that I've been thinking about a lot recently, what happens when we all have watches that project 3D holograms in front of us and we sit here and play and surf the web by touching in the open air? It sounds crazy. But can you imagine trying to write a web page to do that? That's where responsive design really shows how it's built for modern and for the future of computing. Because you're not relying on physical dimensions. You're looking more about the context of the usage. Where are my customers going to be using these devices? How are they going to be using them? You're going to be looking at how they interact with your company. Is this something that they are going to want to interact with me more on mobile or at my desk? Is it something really complex? Am I writing a blog post? Or is it something I'm just taking a picture and putting on a website that everybody can see? And it's about using that richer media. I talked about how at one point when mobile first showed up, it just was all text. Because connections were so slow that you couldn't really get the images across. But now we've got faster connections. They're not yet as fast as our desktops, but you want to provide them the right media to go with the form factor and the connection that they're on. And the last thing we want to do is limit what our customers can do. Because the moment we start putting limits on them, that means they're going to start getting angry with us. Because the thing that I could do sitting at one machine, I can't do with the machine in my pocket. And that is just a way to frustrate our users. So, what is responsive not? Because it's a very important thing. We talk about what it is, but we also can a little bit talk about what it's not. You don't just take this big desktop website and just scale it down to where it fits on a phone. Well, you can't do anything with that. You can't touch it and use it. And it's not about downloading these big, massive images to a phone because, well, a phone doesn't have the processor or the connection speed to actually process those effectively. And it's not about seeing how much functionality we can fit on a screen by making little tiny buttons that your finger just physically cannot actually touch. And it's not about adding too much text to the screen. Because on a mobile device, you want to get them, the customers, the things that they really need to know about. So, there are three things that go into making up responsive. Now this is where we get to a little bit of the technical spot, so please don't glass over with your eyes. I promise I'll make this quick and interesting. Fluid grids. Most websites, 960 pixels. Pixels are the smallest thing that can be displayed on screen. So 960 pixels, we're going to do 10 columns, that's 96 columns, 96 pixels per. And it's fixed. It doesn't matter how big the screen is, you get one thing. But fluid grids say, no. We want 20% of the screen to be the menu and the other 80% to be the actual content. And no matter how big or small you get, we keep to those proportions. Flexible images. The idea with this is you want to download an image to the computer or to the device that the person's device can handle. So you don't want to take a device that's this size and give it a big image, but you don't want to give it this one either. So it's about getting the right image to the right device at the right time. Media queries. Media queries are what tie it all together. They're the little pieces of code that says, hey, this device has these capabilities and is this big. Web server, please send me the stuff that it really needs. So is anybody doing this stuff yet? Well, yes, there are. Now you saw one, Starbucks. But when you look at the rest of this list, these are some of the biggest names out there that are doing it. And you'll notice they're not very big. So if you haven't seen a lot of this, don't be surprised. It's not that popular yet. People are still figuring out how to make this all work together really well. But people aren't doing this. These are some really great sites. They look really cool and are very interactive. But it's not from square one. If you wanted to do this on your website today, there's lots of toolkits that have already been built for you to do this work. You don't have to just start and build it all yourself. And so that is responding responsively. I have a few moments. I'd like to see if anyone has any questions. I'd be happy to answer. Yes, ma'am.
So when you say do it all yourself, do you mean like, so if you have a company has a particular website, for instance, and then they want to make that website available for mobile users and for people with an iPad, then they would go to one of those particular sites and modify their...
Absolutely.
Okay.
That gives you kind of a basic toolkit that says, what size of devices are your customers coming to you with? If you're coming with, and say, let's say you want a phone, a tablet, and a desktop experience, well then these toolkits give you the ability to say, okay, I'm going to need 3 different image sizes, 3 different sets of text, and sometimes the text can be shared across them. It depends on how much room you have. It gets you to that minimum level of functionality. Now, a lot of times it does require developers to go ahead and reach that last bit of making it exactly work for you. Somewhat it depends on your technology platform. If you're using a common thing like to run a website like a content management system called WordPress, you can actually just go buy a template and it will have all of that there for you. And it pulls all your data in and it's very easy. How do I know? I set one up yesterday. Yes, sir.
Well, conversion to these type of sites sort of get rid of our need for different apps. For instance, Papa John's app for your phone,
Absolutely.
Papa John's app for your iPad. If the sites conform to this, can we then get rid of all those apps and just go to the site on each device?
Yes and no. So an app is actually a little bit different. So one of the things you can do with an app is you can make it wrap these responsive websites. And by wrapping it, it means you put a little bit of code in an app, but most of the app runs on your website. And you can definitely reuse some of this. But one of the things about an app is an app can do a lot of things that a web browser can't, such as access the camera on the devices. So if you have an app, the app can be more tailored to the experience of the user because it's native to the platform and gives you some things that a web browser just can't right now. You can absolutely do what you're talking about. There are just some trade-offs to it. Like anything in life, you have some pros and some cons to it. A con would be a lot of times using a responsive site inside an app is a little bit slower than having a true app installed itself. If there are no other questions, that is responsive. Mr. Toastmaster.